Should I start now?
We
Oh,
can, it
oh,
hasn't quite,
we still have another minute. I'm
yeah.
seeing the clock now in a minute, and it just changed. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for showing up this evening on this cold night. My name is Gail Olson, and I am the events chairman for Wild Ones Appalachia Highlands chapter. I would like to do just a very brief explanation of who we are and what our mission is, but I will plan to keep it very short because, like you, I also want to listen to Joanna and David. So, uh, Wild Ones is a national nonprofit group. We promote the use of using natives in our landscapes, and the local component of that is the Appalachia Highlands chapter, and we service both the Northeast Tennessee and Southwest Virginia areas. So we kind of straddle two states and a rather large area, and we have about 80 members. We typically have about one monthly program a month, and those programs can be anywhere from growing plants from seed to a mushroom walk to landscaping design. We run the whole gamut of things that we like to cover. If you would like to find out more about us, I have listed here some of the websites that you can go to. Our uh, Appalachia Highlands website has our events on it. And so it'll have upcoming events such as next month, I think it's February 12th. We have the Southeastern Grasslands Initiative, a speaker from there talking about Virginia grasslands. But we also have an email. If you want to drop us a question, we have a Facebook page that you can join, and that will also keep you updated on some of the events that we have. And we have a YouTube channel. And anytime we have a recorded program like tonight, we upload that to our YouTube channel that you can watch there as well. And if you go there, you're going to find other programs that we've done. And so now I would like to introduce the Piedmont Discovery Center. I have been so excited about having them talk. I was telling them earlier when we were setting up. I've been reading about them in the Washington Post. I've been reading about their Facebook page and their website. We did include a link to their website in most of our publications. So if you have not clicked on that and got to know who they are, I really recommend that you do because they've been doing some really amazing stuff with restoration and conservation. So with that, I would like to go ahead and introduce Joanna Currey. She's the senior field technician, and David Bellangue. Did I pronounce that correctly? I'm sorry. Conservation Nursery Manager. One last thing, after each speaker has finished, at the very end, we are going to take questions. If you will put them into the chat box, and we will take them at the end. And with that, I will turn it back over.
All right. We got the right thing up here. Here we go. And here we go. Can everyone see?
Hooray, success.
Cool. All right. As you can see, this is just a modified version of that graphic that Gail shared. Thank you everyone for being here. Thank you to Gail for organizing this and for sending us many emails and helping us stay on top of it. Thank you to the chapter for having us. We're very excited to share today. As Gail said, my name is Joanna Currey. I'm a senior field technician at Piedmont Discovery Center, and I work primarily in the design and restoration department, which means I spend most of my work time organizing, installing, and taking care of restoration projects. A lot of these happen in people's yards. We have some that are in public spaces, which is really exciting, some that are larger in like big farm land. But a lot of them are just somebody's suburban backyard, like this one you see here. David, you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, so hi everyone. Thanks for having us out. I'm David Bellangue, and I'm the Conservation Nursery Manager here at Piedmont Discovery Center. So I'm in charge of gathering native plant seed from various sites in our region, ethically, of course, and growing, cleaning and storing that seed and growing local genotype native plants for our restorations, so we can have the best plant material available. And I also work a lot with Joanna at the conservation nurse or at the direct design restoration department, helping the field crew implement these designs. So that really helps me see what kind of needs or plants we need, what I need to increase, what I maybe don't need to grow as much of. And I'm really excited to share our methodology with you guys tonight.
All right. So quick introduction to our organization. Piedmont Discovery Center is an environmental nonprofit based in Central Virginia. We're just right outside Charlottesville, and most of us live in the larger Charlottesville area in Albemarle County. Um, we're in the Piedmont ecoregion. And we have three departments: research, conservation nursery, and design and restoration. This is cross-pollinating because we're a small organization. We all help out with all of the different parts, even if we have a primary role. So I work with David in the nursery. I work with the research team, especially during the summer when we've got a lot to do. So we all kind of get our hands in everything. And our mission is advancing biodiversity education and conservation in the Piedmont ecoregion and beyond, like to the Ridge and Valley. So our presentation today is methods for ecological restoration at home. What is ecological restoration, you might ask? It's the process of assisting the recovery of an ecosystem that has been degraded, damaged, or destroyed. That definition comes from the Society for Ecological Restoration, which is an organization that's based in DC. So we know what ecological restoration is. Why bother with it? Um, this is a valid question, I think, because it's very hard. It's physically demanding labor a lot of the time. It can be intimidating. It involves a pretty steep learning curve, things to learn, things to unlearn. And it might feel excessively complicated. There's a lot of factors that go into it. However, it's the best known way to support native ecosystems in your own backyard. Um, and this is backed up by some a pretty convincing resume. It's shaped by and informed by Indigenous knowledge and land stewardship practices. It has 100+ year in the US as a formalized field, and it's backed by an ever-growing body of scientific research, including the research that we do and have been doing for years now. Um, so if you want to support your ecosystem, ecological restoration is the field you want to get into, the practice you want to get into. And the good news is that nobody does it perfectly. We don't do it perfectly. Um, but the, it's worth trying and it's worth learning as you go and not beating yourself up about it as you go. But before taking action, now that you're convinced that ecological restoration is worth doing, it requires some shifts in perspective. So, one of the big shifts in perspective is moving from a focus on individual species to a focus on natural plant communities. Um, Plants have contexts that they belong to, just like people do, just like other organisms do, and contexts that they don't belong to. So, what we call a weed or an invasive species isn't like a bad plant. It's just a plant that's in the wrong context. It's not in the context that it evolved to thrive in and to be in relationship with other organisms in. Um, so, we would say, plant species do not exist in a vacuum, but in association and interdependence with a multitude of other organisms. And so we like to think in terms of plant communities or plant systems, which is an assemblage of interacting species that is uniquely associated with a specific landscape and set of conditions. Another shift in perspective that you need in order to practice ecological restoration is a shift from a preference for a horticultural or landscape design aesthetic to a wild native aesthetic. So we've all seen pictures like what you see on the left. We've seen landscapes like what you see on the left, with plants that are widely spaced, some non-living material put down between those plants. It's highly manicured. There's a mown lawn. It's a lot of evergreens. So, maybe that looks beautiful in its own way, but that is not how plants occur in the wild, and that's not how natural plant communities occur anywhere. Um, so choosing ecological restoration means that you're committing to developing an aesthetic appreciation for natural plant communities as they occur. Um, that means really dense plantings, not these widely spaced shrubs, variable height, perennial dieback. David and I have talked about how lovely winter thatch can be with all the beiges and golds standing up in the snow. Um, so if you're okay with that instead of evergreens, it makes for a lovely landscape. And then, of course, plant movement. Plants propagate themselves. It's what they do. It's what we want them to do. It's what helps restorations succeed. Um, so you've got to be able to shift your perspective to being okay with that. And maybe you need to advocate for it to your neighbors, advocate for it to your housemates or spouses. You might need to stand up to your HOA. It's not normal, it's not accepted, even though it is what's natural. All right, and so the third shift in perspective is moving from thinking of yourself as a landowner to thinking of yourself as a land steward. Um, I'll go back one. This picture on the left is actually, this is in Charlottesville. This is a site that we have surveyed and we have done some rescue efforts because there is an intact natural plant community, a really high quality one, on that site that is being destroyed because they need to make it wider. They need to make that driveway wider because there's a development happening kind of out of frame behind what you're seeing here. Um, so that is a real bummer. That breaks our hearts. And that kind of thing wouldn't be happening. It's a globally endangered plant community. David, is it the community or is it just the Torres Mountain Mint?
I think it's just the Torres Mountain Mint that's really endangered there. Yeah, in that spot, there's a federally and state listed species of mountain mints, Torres Mountain Mint, Pecthanthum torii, that's very rare and indicative of grassland areas. But grasslands as a whole are quite rare nowadays because of development like this.
Yeah, so it's an even more rare thing of the rare thing. And there's no policy that protects that plant community and that specific plant occurring naturally, which is very rare, the Torres Mountain Mint, from being destroyed. So hopefully this is what we want to change with education, growing awareness, and hopefully cultural shifts would then lead to policy change where just like endangered wildlife can be protected, endangered plant life, which is inextricable from wildlife, can also be protected. So yeah, so shifting to a stewardship perspective means considering what supports the health and thriving of all organisms who depend on the land to live. That doesn't mean you can't have a lawn to play in. It doesn't mean you can't have a patio or a vegetable garden. All those things are totally fine. It's just thinking bigger than ourselves. So, how do we do ecological restoration as an organization? We've got 4 steps. And I'm going to walk us through those 4 steps. So the first one is restoration site assessment. Basically, when someone sends us an email saying that they're interested in doing ecological restoration on their site, the first thing we need to do is go out and check it out, see what's going on at that site. So we gather information about a site to determine its natural trajectory, which is the often predictable native vegetative potential of any landscape. To put that in plainer language, it means that we gather data that can allow us to make an educated or research-backed guess about what used to grow at a given site, and what still would be growing or what would be growing now if harmful forms of human disturbance had not destroyed the soil column and therefore the plant community that lived there. So land like this site used to be an orchard, but it's usually in our area agriculture that has dug up the land and killed the plant community, but also, of course, development does it. And that is irreversible. Plant communities can survive surface disturbance like trampling, like fire, ice storms, tree falling, all that kind of stuff. But once you dig up and once you dig deep into the soil, that's what destroys irreversibly a plant community. So here's what we gather, the information that we gather at site assessment. So once we've gathered that information and walked around on the land, we do reference site study. So these photos here are of folks from our team out on survey. They're doing plot work to gather data from intact plant communities. So we'll compile a list of those intact plant communities that we've surveyed, that have the same conditions that I showed you before, or similar, these conditions on the right. We want to line them up as closely as we can with the restoration site. And we have all this data from our own biological assessment projects, and of course in the same region. And then we use the data from those sites to create our planting list for the restoration. And that planting list, we want to make sure that planting list includes a list of species, but also the relative cover of those species. So if your site looks a lot like these 5 other sites that had, between 10 and 50% little blue stem cover, they were really little blue stem heavy remnants. We want to incorporate that into how we're going to plant. We want to plant a lot of little blue stem, somewhere in that range of percentages. And then we get to do the fun part, design and installation. This is David working with a bunch of kids from a school that we partner with on this particular project, which is in Dardentow Park in Charlottesville. So to do our design and installation, we set our budget and timeline, and very importantly, set measurable objectives. The metrics we use for these are called Floristic Quality Index, Native Species Richness, and Exotic Species Index. You can look those up if you want. It's too boring to explain, but basically they help us measure how close our restoration is getting to looking like one of those intact plant communities that we study. We're not going to reach those same numbers. There's just no way to do it. Restoration can't hit that quality because for a lot of reasons, but one of them being there's just some plants that we can't buy and we don't know how to grow yet. David's always working on things. But there's some really rare plants that are just kind of a mystery to cultivation. And so we're never going to be able to get all the plants in our restoration that you find out in the wild in these little pockets of remnant intact plant communities. And so we plan for 3 years. Our designs include 3 years. And then from there, it's up to a client whether they want to take over stewardship, which we hope they will. And we hope that we've been able to help them learn what they need to do well enough that they're able to do it. But if for some reason they're not, we do have clients that we've continued to work with for many more than 3 years to continue maintaining their restoration site. So once we've set our objectives, budget, and timeline, we've got our planting list, we've got to source those plants. David grows a lot of them, and he grows a lot that you can't find commercially otherwise. But if for some reason David doesn't have them, we'll order them from our trusted nurseries. And we like to get local genotype plants wherever possible. David only grows local genotype. We have a nursery here that grows local genotype exclusively as well. But if you don't know what local genotype means, it's basically just a plant whose genetics trace back to the region that you're planting it in. And this is important because it means it's hyper adapted to your location, not, say, a different ecoregion or even a different state or even a different part of the country entirely. Hummingbird Hill Nursery, which also grows the local genotype plants, has a really good explanation of why local genotype matters, if that's something you're interested in reading more about. And then finally, we perform site preparation, plant densely, and overseed. So in this example here, this was a park that this restoration is like in between soccer fields. So there was a lot of fill dirt moved into this park to get those big flat areas for the fields. So there is no trace of an intact native plant community whatsoever here. It's just a weedy, grassy mess. So what we did here was sod rip the entire area, meaning getting the grass off and then getting the roots and a few inches of dirt completely shaved off the surface so that we're taking out those plants, but also taking out the majority of the seed bank and planting into as fresh and clean of a surface as possible. There are situations where there's already native plants at the site that we want to work around, or very special situations where there's already little pockets of actual like remnant native plant communities. But a lot of times it's just somebody's lawn and you can just kind of take it all. Oh yeah, and we also want to make sure we plant densely up front. This is a lot of work. This can be very expensive. It also saves you a lot of time and effort down the road weeding, because as I think you probably all know, as people who are into plants and I'm sure manage plants yourself, a weed will find the tiniest bit of bare soil. So we try to cut down on the amount of non-native species that can make their way in to a new restoration by planting really densely and then seeding on top of that. And finally, we do maintenance. Um, this, of course, involves weeding. No matter how densely we plant, there will always be weeds. Um, More importantly, it involves gap fill. Well, not more importantly, weeding is very important. More interestingly, it involves gap fill planting and seeding. So this means that we do fill in open spaces. You know, we don't just plant once and leave. We usually are coming back throughout those 3 years and adding plants, which is important to fill in space, but most important is to fill in gaps in the planting list. We want to have the highest biodiversity possible in a restoration so that it's as close to those native plant communities we're emulating, those intact native plant communities we're emulating as possible. And then we periodically assess the restoration using those metrics that I shared earlier to see how close we're getting to our objectives. And then we implement natural disturbance. So ideally, we can do prescribed fire at these sites, which these plants are highly adapted to and really benefit from. Or if we can't, we'll do thatch removal and pruning to emulate the effects of fire, take off that winter thatch in late February, early March, and make sure sun can reach the ground. And something I left off this list that's also important is managing ruderal species. So those weedy natives that will come in and take up too much space in the beginning while the slower growing species are getting established. So we do a lot of ruderal species management too, which seems counterintuitive because they're also native, but is a very important part of getting the balance right. Yeah, so with that, I'm going to pass it on to David.
Yes. So I'm going to tell you about ways you can take the PDC methodology for restoration and apply it to your landscape to try and make, get less native plant gardening and more restoration ecology. And I'm going to do this through using my own yard as an example. I recently moved into a new house and I was um, chomping at the bit to apply what I learned in my job to my landscape. It's kind of like a dream to get a really nice planting and I was really excited to do that. So I'm going to kind of walk you through how I applied the methodology that I learned. And I just want to kind of reiterate of why we do this, because like Joanna said, it's going to be a lot harder. It's going to be a lot more complicated. You got to learn a lot of stuff, and it's going to be more work than just, putting some natives in the ground and calling it a day. But I think, at least for me, it gives me a greater sense of purpose. So when I'm restoring these native plant communities, I'm restoring communities that have existed here for hundreds of thousands of years, and that humans have the power to destroy. And in many cases, we have destroyed them. That's why we have to restore these. So it really gives me a good sense of place and purpose to work to restore those. And I'm also a very biophilic person. I want to support as many species in my landscape as possible, the birds and bees and beetles and various insects and animals. And the best and most effective way to do that is to restore the plant communities that they've evolved and that have been interacting with for thousands of years, and that they know the best. So that's why I personally do that. And next, you can click again, Joanna. And yeah, so this is just a before and after picture of my yard, and I'll explain it later. So let's get into it. All right, so just like with restoration that PDC does, you want to gather information about your restoration site. And there are a couple of really important pieces of information that you need in order to figure out what you're restoring to. One thing is the geology and the bedrock that your site's located on. The bedrock and its characteristics are super important for the characteristics of the soil. And the soil is really important for determining what plants would grow in one area versus another. So a really handy way of getting that information is there's an app called the Rocked app, Rocked with a D at the end, that's been really helpful in telling you what the geology of your area is based on your geographic coordinates. So that's really a really fun app. It's even just interesting to look through and see the what kinds of geology and what kinds of bedrocks are in your local area. Another thing is ecoregions, and an ecoregion is defined as a geographic area with similar living and non-living components. And these components usually include the underlying geology, any surface features, soil, climate, vegetation, and wildlife. And so that thinking, instead of thinking less on like county and state and these political borders, thinking more about ecoregions where similar plant communities are grouped together. And you can find that out through bplant.org. They have a map of North America, including both Canada and Mexico, that you can zoom in at. You can click down to the ecosystem level. And it's even just super cool to look around and see what different parts of the country what characteristics influence the plants that grow there. But that's a really important one. And then the last one I want to point you to is, learning about the plants themselves. You got to be able to identify and have information about the native plants of your region and about the invasive plants as well. And so there are a couple of really good resources for that. The Virginia Department of Conservation and Recreation has a really fantastic plant community descriptions on their website, and I'm going to have a link to it in a resource page. But they give a really nice hierarchical way. You can I'm going to walk you through that, but it's really good information, and I learned a lot from it when I first got into this job, and so that's a really invaluable resource. NatureServe is also another really excellent resource. It is a description, attempts to describe all the ecosystems and plant communities of the Americas. And to be honest, it can be a little daunting at first, but the DCR natural plant community descriptions, they often at the bottom of the page have a link to NatureServe for the particular community that they're describing. And so that's really helpful. And then lastly, I'm going to point you to a couple of really important apps for plant identification. I use the Flora of Virginia almost daily. It's a really cool app that has all of the plant species found in Virginia, and it's a really powerful tool. In addition to that, and the FloraQuest Northern Tier, that's another plant app more for the broader mid-Atlantic and kind of interior all the way out to Ohio. And then there's also a new one that they just developed along that the same developers of Flora of Virginia. is the FloraQuest South Central, which includes Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. So you guys have your own app as well. Super important resources, super important to be able to kind of figure out and look at some of these plants so that you know what you're putting in. All right, next slide. And now, before I continue, I just want to describe some really important terms that are going to come up in the preceding, the rest of this presentation. So I'm going to use the term basic or acidic to describe plant communities. And I'm not referring to pH. What I'm referring to is base saturation. And the way I understand it is that's just levels of nutrients in the soil that are available to plants. So stuff like calcium, magnesium, iron, these elements that plants need in order to survive and thrive. And so soils that have higher base saturation will have more of these nutrients available to plants, and you'll get a different suite of plants versus soils that has a low base saturation. So they don't have a lot of nutrients available, and different plants are going to survive. And I just want to say that having nutrient poor soil, having acidic soil, isn't necessarily bad. Oftentimes, especially for restoration, when you try and do a restoration like this, you're going to have a lot more success. Well, maybe not a lot more success, but it's going to be a lot easier. You wouldn't have to battle as many weeds or invasives because these soils are already so challenging to grow in that natives have an advantage over them. So sometimes it can be an asset to have really nutrient poor soils. And then I want to just give a description of forest versus grasslands. So forests obviously have almost complete tree cover, and most all of the plants are shade tolerant or shade obligate, which is that they require shade in order to survive. That versus grasslands, which is what we primarily work with, which are sun-dominated habitats that can vary in a gradient. So it's not just prairies. We've got savannas and woodlands as well. Woodlands being a little bit more shady, but still pretty open with sun plants, full sun plants thriving in little pockets here and there. Savannas are actually one of our most biodiverse ecosystems in North America, both here and in the Midwest, just because you can have a mix of sun-loving species and shade-loving species in the same place. So they're really biodiverse for that reason. And then you have your classic prairie, which is what people usually think of when they think of grasslands, which is almost no tree cover and the plants thriving in full sun. So the woodland, savanna, and prairie, they're all what we consider grasslands. All right, next slide. Okay, so here's a view of my yard before I did any restoration at all. So the restoration area for me is defined by that kind of blue line with a path outlined in black. And there's really not much to see here. There was an old fence that had fallen down. There was some trash. And the area was covered in a whole host of invasives. Burning bush, Japanese honeysuckle, Japanese stiltgrass, autumn olive. And there were very few native plants in here. But I did notice that there was a good overstored component of oaks and hickories, along with some tulip poplar and beech, and that the area was relatively open, kind of at the edge of a clearing. And so with this development, I had a couple of objectives I wanted to do for this restoration. So I wanted to increase native plant diversity to kind of bring that up, and obviously take out the invasives and bring up the native plant diversity. Next, I wanted to increase resources for wildlife. So I wanted to get lots of flowers for pollinators and for beetles and wasps, as well as host plants for a variety of our lepidopterans that would go on to feed a multitude of other organisms. Next. And I also wanted to just increase the visual appeal of the area. I wanted to clean up the trash. I wanted to take out the invasives and put in like a really nice, restoration that's full of our native flowers and showcasing our beautiful native flora. All right, next. All right, so the first thing I did was go into my rock app on my phone and get my bedrock. And so in this case, next, I've got a greenstone or basalt greenstone that's part of that's in the Catoctin formation. So that's really important information to know. And also, up at the top, you have the physiogeographic province and your ecoregion. So I'm in the Piedmont, and then our ecoregion is going to be the Piedmont upland. So That's also important information to know. Next. I just want to talk a little bit more about Rock because it is a really cool app. You can have a map feature where you can, kind of zoom around your local area and see what the bedrock that you're on, see where else it appears, and also see what bedrocks that surrounds you. And so that's really cool, and have fun just kind of zooming around. And I also want to talk about bedrock since it's such an important feature for making the soils and determining what plant community you're going to have. We know that some bedrocks have more plant nutrients than others, and they weather to more nutrient-rich soils than others. So bedrocks that tend to produce base-rich soils, those that have a lot of nutrients, they tend to be what we call mafic rocks. They have very low amount of silica, and tend to be denser, darker colored, and tend to have a lot of plant nutrient. Except limestone is a special case because it's light, or like pale color from the animal shells. But these tend to have lots of the magnesium, the calcium, all these nutrients that plants like and need to grow, plants like and thrive in that. And then there are bedrocks that tend to produce nutrient-poor soils, and these are rocks that we term felsic, so they have a lot more silica in them. There's a lot more. They tend to be lighter in color, less dense, and they just have a lot less of that plant nutrients, and they tend to weather to produce very nutrient-poor soils. All right, next. Okay, so another plant that I noticed growing on my ridge top, because we're on a kind of a ridge sloping down to a creek, but the creek is around 30 feet down or so, is I noticed there are a lot of spice bush growing on the apex of the ridge, and I was like, that's kind of interesting since I usually associate spice bush with wetter areas. So I went on the Flora of Virginia app, and a really cool thing about the Flora of Virginia app is that they have for some plants, they need a certain condition to grow in. And these are what we call indicators because they can indicate that, oh, you have a base-rich soil, or you only grow in this specific plant community. So when I looked up the spice bush, lo and behold, on upland areas, they're most abundant on base-rich soils. So that gets me thinking, all right, I might have a base-rich soil, so we're going to look at base-rich communities. And next. All right, so I'm going to take all the information that I gathered thus far, and then I'm going to use the DCR's natural plant community list to figure out what plant community I have and what plant community I'm going to restore to. So obviously, click. I'm going to be restoring to a terrestrial system. I don't have any water features that I'm going to be working with. All right, next. All right, so that'll bring you to this page. And using the information that I've gathered, I can narrow down this list of things. So I'm in the Piedmont region, so obviously not going to be in the mountains or in the coastal plain, so we can rule those out. And this area tends to dry out in the summer and has heavy clay soils, or dries out in the summer, so it's probably not going to be the mesic low elevation mesic forest. So that'll leave us with two options. Next. The low elevation dry and dry mesic forests, and the woodlands, barrens, and rock outcrops. And I know that the woodlands and rock outcrops tend to be more dominated by large bedrock sheaths and very thin soils. So I'm going to click the dry and dry mesic forest to explore. All right, and then I'll use the same kind of deduction with the information that I have. So again, we can rule out any mountain or mountain or coastal plain things. I didn't see any heaths, so we can rule that out. I didn't see any hemlock, so we can rule out the hemlock forest. There aren't any boulder fields, and it's fairly well drained, so it's not a hard pan forest. So that really leaves us with just two options here. Next, the acidic and the basic oak hickory forest. So with knowing that I saw spice bush in my yard, I'm going to go to the basic oak hickory forest just to double check that that's the community I'm looking for. And lo and behold, they tend to occur in areas with greenstone, which is what I'm on. So I'm using all that information. My community that I'm going to restore to is going to be a basic oak hickory forest. All right, next. Now, one thing I want to say about the DCR and the Virginia is that they haven't caught on with the notion that the Eastern North America had that lots of grasslands, and so some of these conditions or some of the plant communities aren't recognized, or they're going to be like a forest when it really would have been more open in the past. So because my conditions are more open, the conditions are more similar to oak, hickory, savanna / woodland. And for the other one, with the woodlands and barrens, even though they're more influenced by heavy bedrock, they still have a lot of good plants for my plant list, so I can go to get stuff from the mountain basic woodland. Okay, next. All right, so now that we know we got the information, we know which community we're restoring to, now we got to go find some reference sites. And like Joanna said, you want to search out sites that have a similar geology and site conditions so that the plants that you get are going to be as suited to your site as possible. And good places to look are anywhere that native vegetation might have survived, like local and state parks, wildlife management areas, and national forests, with looking out for areas that have low cover of invasive species and a high cover of native plants. Now, next. And luckily, I had a couple of good examples on Catoctin Greenstone. This is a park that's a couple minutes from my house that have some really outstanding rocky woodlands and barrens on Catoctin Greenstone. And one way I can tell that this area is something that I should be using as a reference is it has very low cover of invasive species. So there's not a lot of Japanese honeysuckle, stiltgrass, and autumn olive. And also there's a lot of really good matrix of native plants that I don't normally see, especially in disturbed areas. Stuff like wild quinine, Parthenium integrifolium. Stuff like Pennsylvania sedge and woodland sunflower growing in abundance in this area. So that's kind of tipped me off that this was something I should look, something I should base a plant list off of. Next. This is another reference site that I was using. The Greenstone Ridge around Monticello protects quite a fairly intact stand of basic oak, hickory, forest, and woodland. And these are just two plants that are highlighted that also are indicator plants that tend to be most abundant in base-rich soils. This one is the starry rosinweed, Silphium hystericus, and the other is the early figwort, Scrophularia lanceolata. So those are another way to tip you off that, hey, this is I'm looking at a base-rich ecosystem or base-rich plant community. Next. All right. So let's say, David, how do I know that if I look at a patch of vegetation, if I know that that's an intact plant community versus something that's not? I'm going to give you another tool to help you in that effort, and that's C-value, which is short for coefficient of conservatism. And it basically rates a plant's ability to grow in a degraded landscape versus an intact plant community. And this was originally developed for the Chicago area and the tallgrass prairie region. When restoration was getting going there, people needed a way to find and measure sites so that they could know what plants to put into their restorations. And luckily, if you click, the same thing has been done for the flora of Virginia. So our panel of the state's top botanists went through and gave a rating to every plant in the flora of Virginia. The rating ranges from -5 to 10 based on that ability to grow in a degraded landscape. And you can kind of break this out into 5 categories. Next. All right, so the category is -5 to -1. These are going to be your really invasive plants. These plants, you would never find them in an intact remnant landscape, and these are ones that actively destroy and degrade ecosystems in this region. In addition to the ones mentioned here, there are things like autumn olive, like Chinese yam, and like wineberries. So definitely avoid any areas that have these in abundance. Next. Next are the plants with a C-value of 0. These are not quite as degrading as are invasive plants, but they're definitely not going to be found in intact plant communities that you want to use as a measure. In addition to the ones listed here, there are things like purple dead nettle, tall fescue, and sweet pea. And next. All right. So now we have a C value rating of 1 to 3. These are native plants, but they are very ruderal or very aggressive native plants. These tend to thrive on disturbance and don't really grow in intact plant communities, or if they do, are found in very, very low numbers. In addition to the ones listed here, some other examples are tall goldenrod, Virginia creeper, and Virginia pine. And next. All right, so now we have plants with a rating of 4 to 7. These are tolerant of some disturbance. And when I say disturbance, I'm referring to, like Joanna mentioned, of digging into the soil, either with heavy machinery or plowing the soil with for agriculture. And so these natives that have a rating of 4 to 7, they can tolerate some disturbance. They can recolonize some disturbed areas, but these are really the bread and butter, the matrix of intact plant communities. If you have a high cover of these species, you're going to be, and you're starting to get, you got to pay attention. That's a good thing to know, or a good thing to look at. In addition to these, stuff like starry rosinweed and the early figwort and yellow prairie grass are things that are in this category. Next. And lastly, we've got things with a C value of 8 to 10. So these are, if you see these plants, you know that that's an intact, high quality habitat, because these plants are very intolerant of human disturbance and can, if they are disturbed or wiped out from an area, can take decades to centuries to recolonize. So if you see these are really good indicators. In addition to these, we got some like blue flag iris, Allegheny stonecrop, and long-stalked holly. And also another really good thing about this is these C value lists. If you can type in to whatever search engine C value or coefficient of conservatism flora of Virginia, and these are freely available online. You can download it and you can look through the list. It's kind of fun to just like look through the list to see what rating each plant species has. All right, next. All right, and another cool thing about the Flora of Virginia app is that you can make plant lists in the app, and this is an example of my plant list for my basic oak hickory woodland restoration. And also you can sort plants in the app by the site conditions. So I could say I want plants that only grow in part shade and only grow in dry soil, and it will spit out the plants that fit that criteria that I can go through and that helps me narrow down plants for my restoration. And also, in addition to that, it's just good to have a simple spreadsheet for when you're doing your restoration. It just helps keep track of things, keep track of what species you've added, keeps track of what numbers you've added, and keeps track of what you have yet to add. So it doesn't have to be very fancy, just the name of the species, the number that you need, and then how much you added and when you added. And next. All right, so you have all that information. Now time for the really fun part. You get to install your restoration. So you find your plants. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that in the next couple slides. And then you got to prepare your site. So for certain areas, either, for my case, there wasn't that thick of growth of invasive plants that needed removal. And the area that I was doing was very rocky, so I could just I just did a heavy weeding of my spot before installation, and then I went through and just weeded out anything that I missed. So that's a valid option. If you're doing yard lawn conversion, you do sod ripping like shown at one of our sites in Charlottesville here. You can also do smothering as a way to remove or suppress the existing vegetation. And then just like Joanna said, with planting, plant densely. You want 2 to 4 plants per square foot, which it'll help in the long run because it'll reduce the amount of weeds that you have to pull. And then we tend to mulch with seeds, like seeding really densely with native plants that germinate very quickly and grow and kind of hold that space while your plugs and your quartz are growing and getting bigger. And next. All right, so because I'm a nursery person, I take special interest in sourcing native plants for restorations. I find it really fascinating and really interesting to do. Next. So one of the best ways to source native plants for your restorations is to grow it yourself, and ideally to collect seeds ethically, of course, from your surrounding area to propagate yourself. Um, so yeah, and this there it's I find it really rewarding. And a lot of our native plants are fairly easy with just a little bit of cold stratification to grow. And a really big thing is um, you can get species that are impossible to find in cultivation, or very, very difficult to find in conservation, or in cultivation, sorry. One example is of that a group of that is the thoroughworts, the eupatoriums. They're very well represented in the Piedmont grasslands. We have at least 7 to 8 species that we routinely find, and only 2 species out of those 7 is commonly available for sale: the hyssop leaf thoroughwort and boneset. And so, if we want to include these other really important, really big components in our grasslands, we have to go out and collect the seed and grow it ourselves because we can't find a supplier anywhere else. All right, next. But obviously, oh yeah, I'm sorry. Here is just a little setup, my personal setup at home right now. You can produce, it doesn't have to be very fancy. I scavenged a couple of wooden pallets and I got some cinder blocks. And with this system, I'm planning on producing over 800 plants this year for my restoration. So really excited about that. You don't have to go high tech. It can be pretty low tech and pretty effective. Okay, next.
I'll just cut in to say too, the vast majority of the plants that we plant are plugs. It's
Yes.
good in between a not too expensive but still a mature enough plant that has a high survival rate and will establish well.
And they're very cost effective versus ports or gallons. Okay. All right. Now, we can purchasing plant material is perfectly valid way as well, especially for people who don't have the space to grow a large number of plants, and it's really good for just starting out. And so, you can purchase them from a number of nurseries. You can do some small local nurseries. And in fact, I think that the local nurseries can sometimes have more ecologically appropriate seed to your region than some of the big box stores. So always, keep a watch out for those smaller nurseries. Prairie Moon is another good source of plants, though I will say that I'm going to harp on trying to get source as local as possible because that ecotype, that genotype difference in the plants can be very pronounced. And for example, is big blue stem, Andropogon gyrans. For Virginia ecotype, Virginia source material, it tends to be a lot more docile, is smaller, can play better within a planting. Whereas Midwest genotype that Prairie Moon might sell can get to be over 10 feet tall and can swamp a restoration. So definitely try to source as close as possible, but they do have a very large variety of things, and I'm growing some plants from seed from them as well. So definitely, it's an option. Along with an option is if you have the ability to order from a large wholesale nursery. This one's a little bit more difficult for just the average person because they often don't sell retail, and so you have to do it through a third party. But you can get a lot of plants relatively cheaply, and it's a really good way, especially for storing a large area. But I will say, make sure to, this group probably knows, but, watch out for unethical nurseries or nurseries that practice wild collecting, especially for rare things or things that take a lot of effort, like our ephemerals or, some of these other long-lived things. So just watch out for that and try to make sure that you source ethical things. And then speaking of ethical, 2 really good seed sources for the Eastern North America is Ernst Conservation Seed and Roundstone. They're really good. They have really stringent ethical practices, and we get seed from them all the time for our restorations. All right, next. All right, and then finally maintenance. Like Joanna said, you gotta weed, gotta make sure that these restorations aren't swamped with annual weeds and invasive species, especially in the early stages from a year to two, or 1 to 2 years. It's really good to make sure that they get a good, strong start. And then gap fill is necessary. So as you weed, you want to identify bare patches and try to put plants in. And you can, this is really good for keeping the plant cover high and also good for adding species that maybe initially you wanted to include, but you couldn't find a source. But then later on the line, you're like, oh, I was able to find seeds, I grew it, or was able to buy plants of it. And now you have a space to further diversify your planting, which is always a good thing. And then I like to say that these plantings are, the restorations are low maintenance, but not no maintenance. So you're going to have to you manage this over the years. And obviously, you're not going to manage it as intensely as a lawn or a horticultural planting. But it'll still involve stuff like pruning saplings and digging out trees that aren't growing where they should. Implementing a disturbance regime if that's applicable, because for a basic mesic forest with trillium and bellwort, you might want they don't need you to rake out the leaves or thatch. But using that disturbance regime where applicable, and managing those enthusiastic natives, the things with C values of 1 to 3 that tend to swamp restorations and get really, really big and kind of outcompete everything else. Even though they are still native, we got to keep them in check because they're would be very small, make up a very small percentage of the biomass of a remnant. And next. All right, so just a quick rundown summary. Download those apps, the Rocked app, Flora Virginia, FloraQuest Northern Tier, and FloraQuest South Central. Gather the information about your restoration site, the geology, any plants you see, native plants you see, soil, sun exposure to help you figure out what plant community. Research any observed native plants, see if any of those are indicators that would point in one direction or like indicating a particular plant community. Use that resources to identify your plant community, and then visit a natural area to build your plant list. And next. I want to say it's okay to start small. In fact, I recommend starting small. A little 50 square foot area is much more manageable. You can plant it at a lower cost and manage it much better and have it look better than trying to go big and try to do a massive area and having it turn out to be a weedy mess. So small plantings are really powerful. This is an example of a small planting we call postage stamp prairie in Charlottesville. It's very small by our standards, only around 250 square feet, but it's a powerhouse of pollinator activity. It looks really pretty. And one benefit about starting small is that if you manage it well and have it really get it really strong and going, you can use that restoration as an anchor to expand your restoration outward, which is what this client did here. The postage stamp prairie was doing so well, she decided to extend it another 100 square feet. So starting small, I'd recommend it. Okay, next. All right, so this is just kind of a post planting. So I was able to remove the trash. I was able to put a little rain garden channel because there was a downspout that was coming out nearby. And then I planted a number of native plants, I think around 200 plants, a mix of things that I bought and things that I grew from seed. And I added 54 species of native plants this year, and the restoration seems to be doing really well. And I look forward to continuing to add plants this year and managing this to make it a beautiful space in the years to come. Okay, next. So these are just a list of resources that I think are useful for guiding people in this restoration journey. I just want to say a special note about William Kulina. He produced a series of 3 books about propagating and growing native plants of North America. He has one for wildflowers, one for woody plants and vines, and one for mosses, ferns, and grasses. If you're interested in that, I highly recommend getting those 3 books. They're an indispensable tool or indispensable source of information for these plants. Next. And I just have a couple websites as well that are useful for learning about geology, learning more about natural plant communities and learn about um, yeah, this restoration, switching to a restoration ecology thinking. All right, yeah, next. All right, so thank you so much for having us, and we'll be addressing any questions that you guys had during the presentation.
All right, should we just go ahead and start with the earliest ones in the chat box? Or I don't know if you want to moderate, Gail, you're still muted.
Yeah, sorry, I was just turning on my mic.
No worries.
Yeah, I can read them off to you if you like. The first question was, do you replace the soil when you rip out the sod?
No, we don't. When we're sod ripping, we try to shake off big clods of dirt and make a smooth surface. Um, but we don't fill back in any soil. We just plant and it kind of evens itself out. We're also adding some material when we're putting in plants. So generally in our restorations, it doesn't seem like you have this really uneven surface.
Okay. The second question was my own, and I'm going to skip it because I think David answered it for me.
Okay.
You put in so much effort to create high quality restorations. Are there any easements or other things to protect the areas you restore?
That would be awesome. But no,
Yeah.
most of our restorations are on privately owned property. We have private clients who just have decided it's what they want to do, so it'd be up to them to put an easement on the land.
And there was a second part to that question. Do you work with state entities like VDWR or DCR on projects?
We haven't yet. There's the Thomas Jefferson Soil and Water Conservation District is our district. And so they give out grants for people doing environmentally friendly land projects, basically. They have particular categories and you apply for funding. So we have a very good relationship with them because a lot of folks who otherwise couldn't afford a restoration, if they get a grant, they can. Um, but yeah, that's as far as we've gone thus far.
Mm. And I know probably it's not applicable to the restoration department, but I know we do when we're doing our biological assessments and particularly the Piedmont grassland assessment, we work with the DCR, some of their DCR botanists to voucher any rare plants that we find or
Yeah.
make them or alert them to we're checking back at a population of rare plants that a DCR botanist discovered 10 years ago, stuff like that.
Here we have a question. What species do you recommend for seed mulch?
Yeah, so it's going to be the same species list as your planting list. We tend to seed species that just will germinate from seed that's cast on the restoration. And there's some species that will seed so well that we don't need to plant them. It's more economical to just add them to the restoration via seed. David can speak better than I can to our typical seed mix for our Piedmont savannas and woodlands.
Yeah, so I think one kind of rock star that comes to mind is upland bentgrass, Agrostis perannens. It's a fairly small, kind of wispy perennial that has a very broad ecological tolerance and germinates really well from seed. And brownstone seeds from Kentucky usually has a good supply of that seed. That's one we rely heavily on. But black-eyed Susan, Rebecca Herta comes to mind. Um, you could put partridge pea or our native, the sensitive plant, the sensitive pea, Chemacrista nictitans, but we found that you gotta sow them really lightly because they can take over a restoration site quite quickly if you seed them too heavily. Also, purple top and beaked panic grass are some that we include in a seed mix. As well, a lot of our native Lespedezas, Lespedeza virginica and Lespedeza capitata.
Yeah, we will also seed little blue stem and in large quantities, and then also some broom sedge.
Yes.
Um, One cool thing about the Black-Eyed Susan, the Rudbeckia hirta, is that it's biennial. So we'll see this, and in the first few years of a restoration, it'll be there in a much higher proportion than we want it to be eventually. But it serves this function of taking up space that weeds might take up otherwise, non-native weeds, um, and shading them out, and then eventually kind of fading away as the slower growing plants fill in.
Mm.
Okay, next question. Can you talk more about sourcing seeds that you grow yourself? Are they harvested from public lands?
Yeah, so one benefit of having the grassland assessment is we've got a map of where intact grassland um plant communities are that we can go to get seed from. And oftentimes there's some that are on public land, a few are in a public park, a couple public parks in Charlottesville, but a lot of the times these at least for grassland stuff they persist in roadsides, power line right of ways, kind of these marginal places that people just don't really care about, or they don't really care about, and they just kind of um, just kind of like forget about. So normally, I think that's where a lot of our those seed comes from. A lot of power line right of ways, roadsides, some public parks as well, and also some. If we get collect seed and I grow plants, we want to do this a lot more of getting a seed bed started for um, certain plants, particularly plants that I always need, but they can be kind of difficult to find in large quantities in the wilds. About like growing seed, like planting plants, and then collecting seed from those plants to make more plants.
Okay. And I see Joanna has put some links into our chat feed of your books and other resources that were on your slides. Thank you, Joanna. Last question that I have here is how often do you water first year of restoration?
Yeah, that's totally going to depend on the year, how the year is going. Sometimes we start in the fall and sometimes we plant in the spring. So, one pretty extreme example. So this one here that David showed in his site preparation or his design and installation slide, that is the same project as the one, this is one of our favorite projects. It's
Oh
so
yeah.
great. That's the same one as you can see here on the right. This is, I think, less than a full calendar year later.
Oh, wow.
That's David standing there in the middle of it. You can see all that black-eyed Susan has come up. Um, so this woman, bless her heart, had to water like crazy because we installed it. Of course, it was a huge effort because we installed it all at once. Um, and then we had a drought for 6 weeks in June. I think spanning June and part of July, or was it May and June? Anyway, this was summer of 2024. Uh,
Yeah, that was a dry year.
it was brutal. I mean, she like reached out to the water company to let them know, like, I don't have a leak. I'm just trying to keep my plants alive. So these plants eventually, one of the great advantages of them is that they're adapted to harsh conditions and don't need to be watered. But when they're little tiny baby plants, they do need some help. So you really have to keep an eye on them, especially in the first couple months, especially if you plant in the spring and they have to survive the summer. Um, and it's really just an as needed situation. But yeah, once they get established, they're very hardy, very drought resistant. At
Mm.
least when we're planting, you all have a slightly different set of plants that you're working with. But yeah, native plants are up for harsh conditions, generally speaking.
Yeah, I just want to add to that, like when we were planting this, it was the start of the drought, and in the upper slope, it was almost like planting in Mars dust. Like it was just really
Yeah.
like clay. It didn't even break into dust. It broke into like tiny little pebbles of clay that are bone dry. And I was like, this planting's gonna fail for sure. And then we came back in the fall and everything was happy as a clam. And I was like, What? That's incredible.
She was very dedicated to the plants, so we appreciate that. So if there aren't any more questions, if folks have a minute or are willing to, I made a little survey so you can let us know. I just put the link in the chat. Let us know what you thought of the presentation, how we can make this better, how we can convey this information better to help spread the word. Yeah. So thank you so much, Gail. Let us know.
Well, thank you.
Let us
Thank
know if
you
there's
so
anything
much.
else we need to do.
Yeah, Joanna, David, that's been fantastic. You have given us a lot to think about in our own restorations, and you've given us some tools that we can use. That I'm definitely going to be looking up my soil and see what kind, or not soil, my rock, my bedrock, to see what I have.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
Yeah, of course. Always happy to talk about this.
Thank you.
All right. Well, hope to see you all again.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Click on the survey.
Huh?
Oh yeah, Gail, if
Yeah.
folks missed the survey, and you want to share it with them, just let me know. I've got the link.
Okay. Thank you. I will copy paste it and maybe send it out as well, so that way they can send it back to you.
That would be great.
Okay.
All right. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I
You guys have a
appreciate
good
it.
night.
Bye.
You too. Good night.
Good night.